What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Are You Serious? We got Trystan and Mr. Browning, and we have another very special guest today. We have Jesse Newell. He is a beat writer for the Kansas City Star, and he covers KU basketball and football. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
And so we can just hop right into it. My first question is, the NCAA delivered their response to Kansas's response to all the NCAA allegations, and knowing how long this process can take and how long it has already taken, what is the next step kind of in this process?
Yeah, it's a good question. And for those of us who have to kind of follow this along, we kind of have to remind ourselves as well, because the NCAA has a very particular process when it comes to when you allege violations against a school, kind of what happens and the steps that go the here and here and here. So as you mentioned, it's sort of confusing to say in a tongue twister, but the NCAA delivered a response to KU's response to the notice of allegations. And when that's released, I'm sure the NCAA will say some things that are noteworthy that hasn't quite been released yet. But the main thing with this is that it is moving forward with the timeline. So a hearing will be set now, an NCAA hearing. And once that happens, then KU can kind of make its case to the NCAA. After that, it could take a couple months, but there's a ruling at some point. And so even though maybe a few months back we were all saying, hey, this is going to take a while for this whole thing to complete, now we're more looking at a timeline where, okay, this is probably the next few months and potentially even before the college basketball season starts here in 2020, 2021, if it starts at all with all the coronavirus stuff going on. So yeah, this is another kind of step in the process and just moving closer and closer to a resolution, which just means, okay, now you set up a hearing, now you get heard, and then the NCAA decides with your case, and all of a sudden then there could be, punishments and those sorts of things. It's felt like a really long process, and it's getting a little bit shorter, the timeline, as this thing goes on.
So worst case scenario, KU gets found guilty in whatever these allegations. You see like Bill Self maybe stepping down or being forced out of the program, and someone new taking over the reins at coach.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's sort of tough right now to say. It's almost like trying to predict the weather forecast, in 70 days or something, where there's so many other things that could kind of go about. But if you look at other similar cases out there that the NCAA is looking at right now, some of the schools have one level one violation. Some of them have two level one violations. Kansas has 5 level one violations. So it's pretty apparent that the NCAA is coming after Kansas and coming after Bill Self. So the range of punishments there, we're sort of in uncharted territory, because one level one violation can get you a postseason ban. It can lose you scholarships. What Bill Self has, a coach control charge, it could get him a show cause, which basically is kind of a de facto suspension for an NCAA coach. And that seems severe and probably is severe for this, but it's at least in the rule book where it could be possible. So too early to tell, but yeah, this could have major ramifications for Bill Self. There definitely could be a suspension involved. We saw, Coach Boeheim from Syracuse a few years back, he had a 9-game suspension with something that was sort of similar to this with the violations. So yeah, suspensions are on the table, postseason bans are on the table, scholarship losses are on the table, and that's why this is a pretty serious matter for KU athletics to try to figure out if this is going to be resolved, and if so, what the punishment is going to be.
You spoke to the potential of scholarship reductions, which leads to my question about recruiting. And it appears that it didn't affect this upcoming class so much. You have Bryce Thompson, who's a top 20 player. You have Tyon Gant-Foster, who's the number 1 JUCO player in the country. But in a general sense, with some of the premier players in the country, do you get a feeling that Kansas is not quite in on those kind of kids as much as they were before these allegations?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and I think that's something that the program really needs to have solved, because you mentioned them still getting Bryce Thompson, which Bill Self had a relationship with Bryce's dad. Obviously, Bryce's dad played for him back in the day at Tulsa, so maybe kind of a special relationship there led to that commitment. And but in a general sense, yes, this has affected Bill Self in recruiting, and he's mentioned it. He said that before, that this sort of thing has harmed them. And not only that, they get negatively recruited against, because other schools say, hey, have you seen all the NCAA violations and all the stuff that could happen, and potentially the postseason ban? I've kind of always likened this to a gray cloud for Kansas. Like, we talk about the slow moving process, how this happens, and then you wait 90 days, and then this happens, and then you wait 60 days, and then this happens. And for Kansas, this kind of cloud just kind of keeps hovering over the top of them with their program, where they just don't get it to go away. So that's where it's sort of interesting when all this comes about and whatever punishments happen, whether Kansas decides. There's been a lot of talk about them potentially going on to a higher court and appealing this and saying, hey, the NCAA might be overstepping its bounds here. But if you do that, that gray cloud just kind of hovers over the top of you, and that sort of process takes years usually. So for Bill Self and the program, it might not be the best option. If it's a punishment, let's say it's a 1-year postseason ban and Bill Self is suspended 9 games, again, that's all hypothetical. If that was out there for them, potentially they could just accept it. And they could say, okay, you accept that. And then if Bill Self goes out to recruit, as your point was earlier, okay, next year's class, a postseason ban wouldn't affect them. It would not affect the next freshman you would have coming onto your campus. So I think it's kind of fascinating in this sense because, yes, KU has had problems recruiting because of this. Yes, they've been negatively recruited against because of this. And a lot of that is just because of the perception of all that's going on with the program. So that'll make it interesting when all this is said and done to see if they try to make that gray cloud go away, because if they can get it out and get it in the past and serve their punishment and move on, I think that's probably the way the program would love to have it happen, just so that they can move forward with what's going on instead of kind of always looking back in the past and wondering what's going to happen to them moving forward.
Jumping over to the football side of things now at Kansas, Les Miles mentioned very recently he thinks that there will definitely be a football season. Are you as confident as he is in thinking that there might be or there will be a football season?
Yeah, he was on 610 Sports earlier this week talking about it and was asked about it and kind of came out with that, hey, I think there's going to be a football season, and then sort of caveated it a little bit saying, hey, that's sort of what I've heard and that's what I think. Maybe it'll be delayed. It's tough. It's tough to know at this point. I think what everybody wants to do is to move forward safely, but I don't think anybody knows exactly what that looks like. And it's even trickier, I think, for the college sports, just because professional, you kind of know what you're signing up for. You can maybe have certain things, clauses you can sign up for, but to have college sports, you got to have all these kids on campus. You can't just say, hey, every college football player come back to campus, even though your buddies are staying away doing online classes. And you also add in the amateurism part of this, where these are not professional athletes that you can make go to work. So this is sort of an interesting thing. I feel like I always say, hey, in a month we'll know more, but I don't feel like we know much more this month than we did last month. So it's a tricky question. I'm probably pretty skeptical right now, especially that these games will go on time and that the schedule will be played as it is right now. But I just know that thing draws so much money, so much interest. They're going to try a lot of different ways to make this thing work. So I guess you can never say never, but I wish there were more answers right now than there are. So for now, I guess we just kind of have to wait and see.
So for years, KU's football program has been the doormat of the conference. Now they bring in Les Miles, probably one of the greatest coaches of all time, to turn around the program. And it seems last year they made significant improvements. What would you like to see from the football program this year, improvement-wise?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for Kansas, this is a tough year for them because if you look at what they lost most of their O-line, most of their D-line, and their quarterback, who was really good last year, and they haven't had a good quarterback for basically since Todd Reesing, if you want to go back consistency-wise. So the program could take a minor step back if they play the season, and that's just being realistic based off of the roster and what's going to happen. And also, I thought they did something pretty smart, is that in their football recruiting class, they took 25 freshmen. In years past, they've taken some JUCO players. They tried some quick fix stuff. They tried to – basically, it's almost like the program had this big bill due for, a big restaurant bill due, and nobody wanted to pay for it. Nobody wanted to put the credit card on the table. And finally, Les Miles and the staff said, hey, it might stink in the short term, but if you bring in 25 freshmen, you're going to build the program the right way, or try to, with development, getting them in your weight program. So it might be a couple more years for them, but I think the most positive thing that happened last year was Brent Dearman, the offensive coordinator. The offense really started to go with his final 6 games and got got better. They weren't always consistent. It was kind of a game-to-game thing. So that was a good thing for them. I think defensively, they've got a long ways to go. I mean, they were not that good last year. They need guys to step up, develop in those sort of spots. But the one thing is, if they do play this full schedule, it's a little bit favorable. New Hampshire at home, Boston College, they beat them last year. They get them at home, and at Coastal Carolina. Those are 3 winnable games. So even if this team isn't as good as last year's team, I think just if they continue to improve offensively with Brent Dearman and then show more signs defensively, they could get to 2 or 3 wins again if that happens, if the whole schedule is played, which at this point we're not sure if that's going to be the case.
Jesse, when you go out on the road and cover games in the conference and even out of the conference in both football and basketball, I'm curious to know what the public's perception is of Kansas right now, because obviously with the allegations and the potential punishments that could come from this, is that something that's discussed amongst different universities, different athletic programs, or is that they just not really care that much because of it's not our problem?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of, because most of my job deals with KU people, KU fans. And so it's hard to get out of that little bubble. And then you go out on the road and you go to these different arenas and places and hear fans and, athletic department people, and it is different. And I think what's tough here is that, when I'm covering this or the people I'm around, they have a pretty good knowledge of what's happening here. But I think other teams' fans, because there's not a million hours in the day to go research what's happening with Kansas, it's just more of a perception thing. And the perception for Kansas here in the last couple of years just hasn't been good. I mean, it's been kind of one thing on top of another that's been negative PR wise. And I think overall with these NCAA violations, I just think that there's a sense, and I think Bill Self would agree with this, that there's a sense by people on the outside that are looking in that don't have 100% knowledge of the situation that KU is sort of a dirty program, that they've sort of not done things the correct way to try to win in basketball. And that's not to say that other schools aren't doing the same thing. That's not to say that what Kansas has had alleged against it has been proven. I just think that is the sort of PR hit that you take when you have 5 of 1 violations, and then you have other things happen like, the Snoop Dogg performance at Allen Fieldhouse that all you guys are smiling and laughing about. All you guys know about it. So obviously it was a thing that went national. And then the Sylvia DeSosa fight with K-State. All these things have kind of been added on top of the perception problem that KU has had here in the last couple of years. And again, that's not to say that it's a bad program or that it's done a lot of the things that's been alleged against it that haven't been, they haven't been found guilty of yet. But at the same time, I think that it's a very real thing that, when ESPN's College Game Day comes to campus, one of the first things they ask Bill Self about is the image of his program. And I think that's something that is definitely on the minds of a lot of people in the Big 12 when they face Kansas, and obviously a lot of the fans that scream at the athletes in those arenas, just because, KU has had a lot of stuff happen lately. And even though they aren't all interconnected, I think that they have kind of been thrown together in a lot of fans' minds just because there have been a lot of things that have made headlines here that aren't making headlines at other schools.
I have one more question myself, and we all know this year KU was consistently, ranked one of the best teams in the nation. I think we can all agree that they were one of the best teams in the nation, them along with Baylor and all those other top teams. And going into the tournament, that obviously didn't happen. A lot of people thought KU were the favorites to win. I think they had like an insane odds that they were going to win the whole thing. So without being able to play in the Big 12 tournament or in the NCAA tournament, what do you think this team's legacy is down the road?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's something that Bill Self and the athletic director, Jeff Long, have really struggled with because, as you mentioned, if you look at the numbers, they were number one in everything. The AP poll, coaches poll, they were number one in KenPom, Bart Torvik, team rankings. BPI. I think the only one they weren't number one in was the net, and they fell to number 2 because Gonzaga had played its conference tournament and KU hadn't been able to do that yet. So, it's difficult for them because this team would have had a chance to have a special postseason run. It's really difficult in college basketball because it's still a one-and-done tournament, and upsets happen, and sometimes the ball doesn't bounce your way. But if you were going to pick one team before the tournament to start to win it all, I think most people would have picked Kansas just based off what they've done during the season. So I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do. I think Bill Self is still struggling how they're going to honor the team. Maybe they give them an exhibit at the museum that's out front in Allen Fieldhouse and say, hey, the forgotten season or the unknown season, that sort of thing. But it's really difficult. They didn't win a national championship, and you're not going to put that you were number one in an AP poll on a banner unless it's the final AP poll. So I think they'll probably bring those guys back together before a game next season, likely, and try to give them a round of applause, standing ovation. They obviously get their year number up on the Big 12 banner, but other than that, it's just an unfortunate situation. I think they just kind of have to take what it is and always be the team of what if, and that's nobody's fault, but that's just the reality of the situation. They were probably the best team in basketball, but they aren't the national champion, so it's really difficult to honor that type of team.
Absolutely. Well, that is all we have for you. Thank you so much, Jesse, for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you guys for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your Friday and have a great weekend, and we will see you guys on Tuesday. Peace out.